So why don't we go ahead and get started? I've got like maybe 45 minutes to talk with you about this, and I really wanted to bring about the piece on managing innovation. I think that's really key for us, and I actually teach a 10-week class on this, so we're going to get a little snippets of some of the best things I think, but I've just taken out the management pieces. I think that's a little bit better for us to work with. Really, I think this creative destruction is actually a good thing, and innovation is... Sure.
First word. Do you really want to manage?
You absolutely do, because if you don't, it's chaos. You absolutely do. Well, the good thing about innovation, you want to be able to create a creative environment that allows people to have the freedom to do so. But good managers and good leaders control that chaos. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Kind of how you can do...
I'm going to say the word control. I'm talking about the very early stages, and I will not ask you more questions. At the beginning, when you really spark innovation, you don't spark it. It gets sparked by creating the environment conducive to all the things that you said.
You are so right. That's why we're going to talk about how you create an innovative ecosystem.
I have such an uneasy feeling by the word manage, because you have to manage your horse to go to water.
Well, you are in the right place then, because we're going to learn about it today. So I appreciate it. That's what we love to have professors in the class. It's always good. But the first thing I want to do is make sure we all start off this on the right base, and that's what is innovation, because people ought to think about that. And it's really our ability to try to do things and create things in a new way. And you've got to be able to kind of create that in an innovative process framework. And I see it as these three things that kind of come around. You have some invention that comes into your organization. You bring that innovation up to the marketplace, and then it gets diffused into the marketplace. And once that diffusion occurs, we do it again. We bring back more innovation and more invention into the process. And really the goal here is to have the end users be able to take that and recognize a need. Good leaders will say, wow, the user has that need, because users will try to create something they don't have in the marketplace and then throw the right capital at it to make it happen. So that's what we want to try to do here. And we all know about the cost of failing. These are names that we used to know very well, and I would dare to say there's even some more that are in the queue that might be next. It's up to us as leaders, especially in the IT space, to be able to embrace this, realize what's happening, and make sure we're not on this list. So why do we push for this innovation? It's for growth. It's continual improvement that we have to do, and it's to reduce costs, because we realize that this competitive advantage, as listed here in Harvard Business Review in 2007, the advantage lies in being able to make that creativity come about, not just in some intellectual know-how that makes it happen, in a process that we don't control. So you really want to drive that. And there are two types of innovation that are there. One is continuous, and the other is disruptive. And as a good leader, you're going to see and kind of figure out where those are. And of course, the continuous innovation is where you have some process, you have established products, and you want to make it better and better all the time. But it's the disruptive that really creates new opportunity. This is where you often see opportunities come from below, and a lot of companies might miss this opportunity if they're not in it. And it usually starts with niche markets, because there's some little piece of users, some little group of users out there that wants to create something new. They create something on their own because there's no solution in the marketplace. And if you're keen to it, you can see it, and that's the next disruption that's coming about. And you can see these innovations are not really all created equal. There are sustaining innovations, as you can see here, say with a detergent. That gets better over time, but it's still doing the same thing. It's still cleaning. But if you do this kind of up your game model where you do some breakout innovations, you can create something that we had before, like a percolator coffee machine to a drip coffee machine, now to these high-end espresso machines, to really just take it to another level. But then what we really love to see are these disruptive innovations, and these are rare. This is where it truly changes the game. And a great example of this would be Sony's Walkman going to their Discman, and then just being completely obliterated by the digital impact of streaming music on something like the iPod. And it completely reinvented the industry. Those are the things you want to think, like, what kind of innovations are we talking about here? And as a business leader, you have the opportunity for innovation exploration, innovation execution, and innovation exploitation. And I would dare to say, as business leaders, you need to do a little bit of all both. So when you're talking about the exploration, this is about your management process. how you're going to actually accomplish this. The execution is the operational choices that you make, organizational choices, excuse me, and the exploitation is the strategic choices you make and how you manage those. So let's go through this. The first one is this innovation exploration, and this is where you're actively investigating things. You're trying to figure out what might be the next thing, and you see this a lot with entrepreneurs. They are out trying to figure out what this next thing could be, and they're really just at the start of the S-curve as it starts to take off. You see lots of creative destruction in this space, and the interesting thing with most management leaders, this is a very risky time, and managers like to manage risk. They don't like to take it, and that's natural. You're held to some standards, and this is particularly true for investments because you're constantly asking, should I be investing in this new thing? Is this something I want to go forward? And so when you're in this space, you'll see a lot of corporations do things like brainstorming sessions and offsites. You're trying to get some feedback from your power users to say, what could I do here that could be different to try to make something innovative? And the interesting thing with technology, since most of it in the technology space, is it's enabling new ways of doing things that we didn't see before at substantial cost. So as you go through this, you realize it's kind of a circular refinement here where you explore things, and this might come from a brainstorming session or an offsite, analyze it, and then you keep refining it because almost always it's never right the first time. And this process loop kind of keeps going, and you look at it from a couple of views. One is this technology view, which you're trying to compare it to what's out there in the marketplace, what could be done, can we do something better about that? Also the marketplace view of, do people even want this? And what's really interesting, when the leaders are looking at these early adopter users, they're trying to say, wow, is this going to grow into the next big marketplace? And you're trying to figure that out. And then, of course, the competitive view. And that's something that you really want to think of as a manager, because if you come up with some great idea, or you think it's some great idea, can you protect it? Is this not something that would just be taken in the marketplace, and then you can't leverage the revenue creation that would have come from this? And will I even get credit for it? So something good to think about this. And this is more of a strategic view. You look at what Google did with the Android system. Was it to their advantage to make it open source? Was it to their advantage to keep it? How much influence, power? Now it's 76% of the market share for operating systems. When we get to the execution space, you want to really think about how your organization is operating to execute and just make it into a machine and actually get it going and going well. This is where you're developing a culture that will say we're ready to experiment, we are open to experimentation, we iterate it and we keep refining it and we make it better and better and better. And that is true innovation, it's just refinements of the innovation. And in order to do that, a lot of people will set up financial rewards. That seems to be a great incentive for folks to be able to move this in the right direction. Because remember, you're asking your employees, your team, to take risks. You're asking them to think differently. And there's got to be some reason upon why they want to disrupt what's the easy way to do it. Financial seems to be a lot of that. Also, could just be intrinsic, like awards and stuff of that nature. The other thing, as leaders, you've got to set up a culture that kind of embraces that. And you can see here, it's the ability to figure out ways to take an innovation and have some derivative off of that that says, yeah, let's try that, let's see what happens, and see if we can go forward with that. A lot of times, people will use the agile method. It seems to be one that's very popular to try to say, let's just get into this mindset where we continually refine and improve over time. It's something that we use, and that's a great system to be able to do it. The last one is this innovation exploitation. And this is where you've come up with the innovation and you really just want to capture market share. You really want to take advantage of the benefit that you created and start making some revenue and really milk it for all it's worth. The revenue generation in this phase is high. And really you're just trying to scale your business fast enough to capture that innovative market that you've created. And it takes a different mind shift in the set of a leader to be able to do that. What you'll know when you're doing this is you're going to start seeing imitators come in. You'll know that you've got something really good. They'll see that you're making high profits. And if you start seeing a lot of little ones chipping away at the bottom, you'll know that you're in the right space with that. And we see a lot of imitators come in this space. So you almost want to look at this as an innovation matrix to understand where you would fall in this place. Looking between customer needs and the technology. If you've got some old customer need and you've got some old technology you're working with, it's just an incremental innovation. This is where you're just trying to get better at the process that you're doing. But if you've got some new customer need that hasn't been met before with some new technology, let's say something like the iPod that I just brought over, this is where the radical innovation happens. And if you can kind of conceptualize where you are in the space, it helps you understand what's the best way to approach it. So there's a strategy that I like to share with business leaders to do this, because you can approach this with a business leadership strategy of how to do this. And one example I want to give you is the creation of the World Wide Web. It was done by a user. This happens to be in CERN, because the end user, this John Berners guy here, said, you know what, I need to figure out a way that computers can easily share information, even though they're different systems. And this is where the World Wide Web came out. This was the next computer that he did all this on. Excuse me. And so what that means is the innovation actually came from the user. The innovation was the user's need. No one made this up. He says, I had to do this for myself. It was clunky at the beginning, but it worked fine. And what you'll see is there are user innovations and there are manufacturer innovations. And the user innovations tend to come from some need that the end user has, something like a sports bar. Cliff sports bars were the same way. Someone is an outdoor enthusiast, they're a hiker, they said, you know what, I need some high-packed, low-calorie energy, can I do this? Or even the first mountain bike. You know, most bikes are on the street. There were a group of users out there that said, you know what, I want to take my bike up in the hills, in the mountains. That didn't come from a manufacturer, it came from a user. And so manufacturer innovations tend to come from making it better or adding more or improving upon that, some incremental innovation, if you will. Like a sports bar that's amazingly good, but tastes better or has fewer calories or more energy packed in. Or in the case of a mountain bike, it was a lighter frame and went titanium. So they gave, you know, the end users a better opportunity. But they didn't come up with the initial idea itself. And you can see this in product after product, that the consumers actually come up with the innovation. One of the most famous here was the whiteout, was an administrative assistant who was sick of retyping on the typewriter over and over and over, and so she created whiteout. All of these different things came from users. The sports industry really didn't see this. A woman came up with the sports bra. That was a need she had, so she created it. And this is where we start seeing different things come in from users. And wouldn't it be great if we're good leaders and we can figure out what those users are wanting? And we can, if we're in tune to it. So if you look at this from the innovation piece of where users are going from, everybody needs to solve some problem. The manufacturer is trying to solve it by what the user wants, but the user wants it because it's trying to solve some need. And so what they'll do is they'll actually go to clubs and blogs and try to figure it out themselves. Whereas a manufacturer will try to be the source. They'll try to create specifications and list of things and try to solve this problem. And the reason this is so difficult to do is because the people that want the information are the ones that don't have it. So information tends to be very sticky. It stays on the side with the people that know it the best. So if you're talking about an end user, for the bicycle, one of the things that the bicyclist might write is say, hey, I want to be able to do something with this mountain bike. And the user's like, well, I didn't know you wanted to go into the mountains, or I didn't know you wanted to do this particular thing. And so you'll find a lot of developers, and I'm saying developers in the sense of an item, not just coding developers, will say, you didn't tell me you wanted to use it this way. They just don't understand the user place. And so what happens is these users are looking for information, and they actually source that from some source of knowledge, which tends to be a manufacturer. And you'll see it. They'll go out, they'll do research, they will call, they will join a blog. You'll see them when they post things on your customer service site, like why doesn't it do this and why doesn't it do that? That's the best place to go look for innovations of how to increase your product, because they're looking for that information to fill some need that they have. Same thing with the manufacturer. They're going out to the end user saying, what is it that you need? How can we make this better? What is it that's missing from our product? Why do you buy our competitors and not ours? And so this is always this constant thing of trying to understand from the other side, who has the information, what it is that they're looking for. And that information is the key for what they're trying to seek out. So if you look at this idea between rapid prototyping, they'll create some type of user specification. They will hand it over to the manufacturer from the users, and the users will say, okay, we've got a prototype, let me hand it back to you, see what you think, give us some feedback, and then it'll come back and we'll try to incorporate those changes. And then hopefully it gets iterated enough times that the user is satisfied. And that's kind of the goal. But you're constantly across this bridge of information. You're constantly trying to share from the other side. And this is why this process becomes so difficult, because we think we know what you want. We think we're giving you the products that you want. We're trying to be this innovative, creative opportunity for you, but we don't understand it well. And so we kind of see this. And so users have this ability to create innovations because they're doing it. They're actually fixing things themselves. It's usually a rough way of doing it, but they're doing it, and they're learning by doing. So it's really, really good if you have employees that actually do what it is you're creating. If you're creating a mountain bike and they ride mountain bikes, they are the better employee that you have. And the learning can really be done cheaply here within this own narrow niche of doing. So what happens is a user says, I need to do one little thing, one particular thing, and they do it themselves, and they do it well, and that's where they start innovating. So I'll give you a good example. If you're a mountain biker and you do these jumps and you do these flips, when your feet come off the pedals start flipping. And then when you go back to land, the pedal's still flipping, so sometimes you miss it. So what does a bike user do? They put some really cheap foam there on the wheel that kind of creates some friction, and suddenly it doesn't move. It's still there in the same spot where the biker's foot left off. Wow, we didn't think of that. Well, you're not jumping into the air with a bike either. So this is where you start thinking about how does my user do this? And so you'll see people going out and just studying over and over and over what the end users are doing, what they're trying to pick up on things like this. So they do it by doing things very cheaply, by learning very cheaply. So I wanted to bring this idea up around management structure around concepts. So Clayton Christensen is a professor at Harvard, and he created this opportunity for the theory of disruptive innovation. And I want to talk to you about the disruptors are innovators. There's no doubt about that. But disruptors are both destructive and creative, and they change markets in that model. So this book, The Innovator's Dilemma, I highly recommend it. We do it for all of our MBAs, that talks about this concept. And the idea here is that if you create a product or a service, and you do it over and over and over, and you do it over time, you should get better at it. And if you get better at doing what you do, your costs should go down. You should be cutting out the fat. You should be making your product and your services more streamlined. So this is this concept of deflationary economics, where costs will go down over time per unit cost. And that should happen. And a good example that's very obvious to us in the IT industry is AWS. They have dropped their prices 52 times since they came about in 2006. More services for cheaper over and over and over. And you can see it's just an exponential growth pattern for them. Tesla vehicles is another one. If any of you have a Tesla, you buy the car, you get a software upgrade, and it does even more than it did before. Wow, I love that. When they turned on the feature for autonomous driving, you go out to the car the next day after that overnight download, and suddenly your car is autonomous. That type of continual opportunity to make things better helps. And so what will happen is customers have a need, a desire, a normal process that says, over time, I expect things to get better. Either get it cheaper, make it faster, make it cleaner. It should happen over time. So you'll find customers' requirements for whatever product or service you're doing increase over time. And what will happen is most incumbent companies will hear that and they'll say, oh, we're going to add this to it. We're going to create this new product. We're going to add this new feature to the thing. For us here in IT, we think of an easy one would be Microsoft Office. I need to open a spreadsheet and run some numbers. I want to just write a letter. But yet Microsoft Office kept adding things like mail merge and pagination, and the ribbons at the top just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I know this, I used to work at Microsoft. The software just got so big and bloated, and the price kept going up. Finally, consumers are like, you know, I don't use half of this stuff. It's not of value to me. And what tends to happen is the incumbent listens to their most picky customer, the loudest customer, because they're thinking, oh, you're our power user, you're what everyone wants. Well, not necessarily. And what will happen is, as your services keep increasing, you surpass the customer requirements. And some new entrant will come along. They'll say, you know, you don't need all the stuff in the product. I'll make a lower product. It won't be as good, but we'll get better over time. Companies do. And eventually, this inferior product, even though it's at a low price, will meet customer expectations. And eventually they'll be like, you know, this one's good enough. I don't need to go pay more for the other product because I'm really not using that much more about it. This is the actual chart from Christian Clayton's book. And there's this range of high and low, if you will, of it barely meets it or meets it good, you know, at a high end. Anything over that, customers really don't care about, even though the incumbent might. Anything below it, they won't buy it, but there's this range upon which they will. And when it goes past this, they say, you know what, it's not worth it. Why do I spend the extra money on this? So they don't worry about it. And the whole theory behind this disruptive innovation idea is that sometimes it is best not to listen to your customer. Sometimes it is best to look at very small niche markets as a leader where the innovation is occurring and make the investments in those small niche markets. Now, they're not producing a lot of revenue. They don't have a lot of impact right now on the bottom line. So a lot of leaders will just say, oh, we'll give it a little bit, but not a lot. But if you can perceive where things are happening, you won't get caught with some other small company coming behind you and keeping innovation going on their side. And then suddenly you realize, wow, they had a product just good enough and my customers jump. And that tends to be what happens. Let me show you this little short 2-minute video on disruptive innovation that might be able to help you see a little bit more about what I'm talking here. With ads.
How does a small, young company beat an industry giant on its own turf? Through what Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen calls disruptive innovation. It works like this. Big players focus on sustaining innovation, upgrading existing products and services to attract higher-paying customers. But soon, they start to ignore all the regular customers who just want simple, low-cost alternatives. That's where the entrepreneurial company jumps in with that basic offering. The big guys stay focused on more profitable customers and begin to overserve, adding bells and whistles no one wants to pay for. Meanwhile, the disruptor improves its product to appeal to more people. By the time the incumbent notices, the disruptor has already started to take over the market. The classic example is the steel mini mills, which first produced low-quality rebar, then moved to sheet steel, stealing business from the large mills that had been dominant. More recent disruptors include car makers like Toyota and Hyundai, which launched with economy models that added luxury features and brands. The only way for industry giants to fight back is by launching their own disruptive innovations. To succeed, they must treat the project as a separate unit with a different business model and growth expectations. Ask, what job do customers need to get done? Segment customers by job, not by product, market size, or demographics. And develop basic, low-cost ways to get the job done. That's how Procter & Gamble came up with Crest White Strips, a cheap, do-it-yourself alternative to an expensive dental service. Disruptive innovation creates new markets and reshapes existing ones. To achieve growth in a fast-changing world, you want to be a disruptor. Don't be disrupted.
So that's the key if you take anything away. Definitely don't be disrupted on this. So one of the things that will happen is after you've embraced this concept and you become the incumbent. You actually have your product perceived. And this is what will usually happen. Even the disruptive technology will eventually surpass customer demand. What do you do then? And then it's at that point you actually want to change the axis and go after those non-consumers, those ones that didn't even realize that they needed your products, and really change the name of the game, because incumbents tend to win at sustaining battles, but it's the innovative startups that tend to do very, very well at these new innovative opportunities for when they are a new entrant into the marketplace. It's just really difficult for an incumbent to get that much more innovative. There's a system in place, there's a culture in place. So you got to think through that. And really, this is part of a growth life cycle on the typical S-curve. You will have growth, you'll have some maturity, and this is where you're really taking in all the revenue, but eventually, very typically, you will have a decline. Most companies don't make this rebirth piece. You see it with Netflix at Blockbuster or online news versus the newspapers. It's continual after industry after industry after industry. And really, the theory of disruptive innovation isn't telling us what we should do. Remember, a lot of good management has made the right decision, the good management. We were investing in the things that were making us money. But that may have hurt you because you're missing these little small niche markets that are coming up that you didn't see before. And you miss these game-changing transformations. So it is definitely a challenge. And you have to see that where this is coming about. Really, the best way for leaders to do this is you almost have to have that perception to be able to see around the corners, to know what's coming next. And if you can do that, then you're going to be that innovative leader. And that takes a lot. Part of what you want to do is kind of understand what's happening in the marketplace. This is interesting because Jack Welch basically said maximizing shareholder value is the dumbest idea out there. What you really want to do is delight your customers. If you're doing everything that would make them happy, and Amazon does an amazing job of this, they're not worried about the profits, they're not worried about hitting a number, they're worried about making their customers happy. And that's really key. And you can see this kind of shift of how you delight customers. It's not from controlling individuals, but enabling the teams to go do whatever it takes. It's not about this top-down communications, but allowing your teams to have multi-directional arrangement to say, you know, we want to have a conversation, not just take a dictate order from down, up above. These types of things allow you to do that. So welcome to this creative economy, because that's the way it works. And it's different for most leaders to try to breathe this. So how do you manage a large enterprise? Most of us work for very large organizations in this, so how do you bring this in? You'll see that this typical curve of lead users comes in, and you'll have this market majority, and most incumbents will target the majority. That's where the money is, that's where the opportunity is. But you have to realize that innovation comes from this early adopter place. It's an opportunity for leaders to basically see who are these lead users and what are they doing. And they're very small, by the way. So you have to figure out what's happening here. And you'll see that this early set of lead users has no solution in the marketplace. So they're creating it, like that mountain bike with the little piece of foam on the pedal. And so what happens is you'll see these users tend to lead at the edge of the market. And if you are an innovative company, you'll be able to kind of spot this, and you'll get inspiration for where that next innovation could come. And you'll be able to ride that wave as it comes about. This is Everett Rogers' book on the diffusion of innovations. This small little piece of lead users that comes in. This is where the innovation is happening. And this is where key business leaders, and you'll see this a lot with CEOs, they let other people kind of run the business, but they're out in the marketplace trying to get a pulse on what's happening, because this is what's occurring. And many users will come back and say, you know, I invest in all this innovation stuff and it's not paying back. It's taking too long. It's taking too much of my revenue. But I would dare to say you have to be able to address these concerns, and you can, because innovation-driven enterprises really understand what this means. And the key behind this is it does take time, and it does require cross-organizational collaboration, because everyone has to be involved in the picture here. Because you'll have, as a leader, a required investment that occurs at the beginning, and it will be a negative investment because you're investing in some new technology. Now, eventually, it will surpass. You'll start making enough sales, and you'll be able to harvest that investment. But what we find is really happening here is that as this process occurs, we're running into this obsolescence squeeze. It's happening faster, and what you thought was going to be a long-term payout, and maybe you did your financial analysis behind it, doesn't work out as long as you thought. And then you're like, oh, what do I do now? And what we found is that innovative companies that know this is going to occur can say, you know what, I'm going to design this into the system, and we're going to keep reinventing and keep investing in this, and basically try to supplant ourselves and realize that this curve, even though it can still be the same over time, is a continual flow of cash flow between negative and positive. Eventually, you make as much, if not more, but you have to do this in order to be able to stay competitive in the marketplace. So one of the way traditional users look at this is through budgets. They go through these stopgate processes by looking at it from a budget-wise, not from a project. And it's these project gates that actually help you figure this out, because traditional businesses are really built for stability. They're built to understand, like, hey, this is the way our processes work. But in a particular piece with innovation-driven leadership, they don't have that opportunity. They have to move this fast. They have to be more responsive to the marketplace. So this becomes this leadership paradox about, what am I going to do here? Because simplicity and repeatability are required, but flexibility and creativity are needed, but flexibility and creativity are absolutely required. So you've got to figure out how to balance these investments and be able to say, where do I put this piece in? And I get a lot of this from like, oh, this is what they do in Silicon Valley. Well, yeah, and that's a great place to look at it, but an enterprise is way more than just this collection of startups. So you've got to figure out how to do this. One of the ways I think you could do that is through learning loops. So in most traditional businesses, you'll have this piece where you have some specification, you give a task to your team, and then you say, did you meet it or not? Whereas a learning loop basically says, let's try it, let's come up with an idea, let's take it through the process, let's reconfigure it if it's not working, and keep going again. It's a little bit more of outcome driven than it is just a process driven. And this build, test, learn loop that requires more involvement cross-culture to be able to make this work across a large enterprise. So let me give you an example. You want to go drive somewhere. So you say, okay, I want to go from point A to point B. Great. This is how we're going to go. But then when you get on the road, you're going to run into traffic, you run into some weather situation. You make changes along the way, but you still get to point B. And that's where like feedback's coming in. Oh, we got some information from the weather. We got some information from the traffic report. And good leaders can do that. And this innovative loop that goes through the whole system basically says it's continual refinement. It's continual process improvement. And basically you can do this within loops that are could potentially be smaller within the organization, because if you do it through the whole way, it takes a little bit longer. And what you want to do is you want to measure the outcomes, not the output, because it's the goal of what you're trying to get accomplished here. And so it's this mind shift of really going through feedback loops. And loops can be throughout the organization, from the top up to the enterprise, to the bottom ones that might say be down here with the user experience or development. So I look at this as multiple ways, and you have to look at your own organization to figure out how this could be. If you do something at a team level, it's pretty easy to do. You should be able to do that because it's not affecting other parts of the organization, and you give them the leeway to do what they need to do and be innovative and try things and fail at things and be okay with it. If you want to try to do it across the entire corporation, across the entire enterprise, this can be challenging. So you have to understand where your culture is at that time, and is it really worthwhile? Can we do it at this point of where we are? And that's where a business leader has to come in. The interesting thing is when you do things enterprise-wide like that and you try to bring in this innovation, it has to involve the entire organization. So if you do these things, say, release at will, meaning if you come up with some new piece of the product, you just put it in, you realize that that also affects how the financial parts of the corporation work. It also affects the brand and legal. It affects training, because if you produce some new issue, product, deliverable, how are we going to train the users on that? The interesting thing here is the feedback happens well. It's more responsive to the customer, so they love it. They think this is great. But you got to realize the strategy may have to be much more thought out through across on the enterprise level. Two companies I think that do this really well are Facebook and Netflix. And Facebook does this amazingly. They actually produce code in production in beta all the time. You are their guinea pigs, and they break things a lot. Netflix is doing the same thing. It's constant refinement. They're doing little tests with little set market segments. So it's possible, but look to those companies that can help you with that know. And really, you've got to be able to do this at an organizational level, and basically, don't break it down into the traditional organizational structures. This has to be in that way. No, you want to do a loop of everyone that it affects. And then don't be afraid to view this at an entire enterprise level wide, because if you have multiple loops going at one time, how will those affect each other? So it's something you want to think about there. One of the things that a lot of business users think about when they lead this is called islands of change. Is this opportunity to just affect a set of users or a process within that would only affect that piece, like the research group or the agile development group. That way, you've got a capability to say, I'm going to test within and then go bigger as you go across. So these are these islands of change. The other area to use is slices. So this is slice dependencies. Basically, it allows you to say, I'm going to do one area. So you might do a geography or one particular product group from top to bottom, but don't do the entire corporation. Another opportunity for you here. So one of the things I want to do is go into leading culture as I close this out. Really leading an innovative culture is a way that you figure out how we bring this innovative process in. And culture is a key part of that. This is a global index of where countries fall for innovation. And why this is important is you need to understand what kind of culture are you working with. I do a lot of work internationally, and to see what this could be. You can see here the United States at the top for the developed countries, but look at China, #1 in the middle income. What they're doing now and how they're coming about with innovation is really good, but the quality of their innovation, and I look particularly at patents, may not be as high as, say, the United States. And so there's this close relationship between culture and urbanization and what occurs with innovation that we can see globally. So if you are working in Los Angeles, a highly innovative city, not so much of a problem. If you have a plant in some small rural part of the United States, could be a problem. You may not bring the same innovative features and skills into one area that you would in the other. And you have to kind of consider that, like, is this something that they could do? And really it's this opportunity to lead cultural change, and you'll see it in these learning loops and this looping process whenever you talk about innovation. Basically setting the vision, planning it, implementing it, assessing how you do, going back through the process, and then continuing again on this loop. That's part of the innovation process that we do. Now, when this occurs, and many of us can think back to managers that we had, and we thought, okay, this person is schizophrenic. They ask one thing, and the next day they're changing. It's what I call this loose, tight leadership. You want to be able to be loose with your team, allow them the freedom to be creative at the beginning, but then once we've all determined, like, yeah, that's the way to go, then you tighten it in. You basically bring your leadership skills even tighter on that, and you start putting more constraints. You run into an issue after you've started creating it, loosen it up again, and then tighten it back down. It's this loose, tight relationship, and you kind of work yourself, and by the way, you don't loosen it further down the pipe, you loosen it very highly at the beginning of the pipe. And that way, you're basically going through and realizing, I know when to turn it on, I know when not to turn it on. And some of your users may say, gee, what does he want? What is she looking for? This is why they seem to be doing that. And you'll see this even through the Collective Genius book, this opportunity to create some creative abrasion. And in the creative abrasion, you're basically encouraging your team to banter. I don't want to say argue, I don't want to say fight, but if you set the ground rules about this, it actually builds better ideas. And you want to bring that key place into your organization. And one of the things with this framework is its capabilities, which is creating that abrasion, but also the culture. Do you have a culture that's embraced that says, hey, we have a sense of purpose, we have rules for engagement, so yeah, we can argue a little bit, and that's good. You want that bantering to occur to create the best idea, but once it's developed, you stop. We're done. We're moving forward as a team on that. So let me finish this off with this piece. I always leave this out. If you have creative people and you add the creative process to it and you create a creative culture, that's where the innovation output's going to happen. That's what I like to bring it with. All right, so I heard the timer, so I know I'm at my time. So hopefully that was of value to you. I'll be happy to give this for you. And thank you for attending. I appreciate it. I'll be here if you have any questions. So.
Now I would recommend